All right, it's time to look at trending business news. And in our package today, African Development Bank is sinking, says it is sinking $460,000 into Nigeria Securities and Exchange Commission. And the aim is to deepen modernization, boost investor confidence. For details of these and other stories, here is Salika Akbanachi Arwa.
It is yet another vital support for the development of the Nigerian economy by the African Development Bank, and this time through the Securities and Exchange Commission. The grant, valued at $460,000, is to finance technical assistance and capacity building for capital market development. Lami Boro, Director General, African Development Bank Group, says the initiative is to integrate capital markets in Africa and give innovative financial instruments, which has become even more urgent with the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
The African Development Bank's support for this project derives from the federal government of Nigeria's efforts to promote the development of a competitive, deep and liquid capital market supported by an enabling regulatory environment.
The automated African surveillance tool will enhance the Securities and Exchange Commission's role in investor protection, as well as ensure a transparent, fair and orderly market and reduce systematic risk.
Market surveillance system is required to aid the regulator in detecting and addressing market abuse as quickly as and efficiently as possible, and to proactively prevent major infractions.
The grant from the Capital Markets Development Trust Fund is a multi-donor trust fund administered by African Development Bank and support by the Ministry of Finance of Luxembourg and Ministry of Foreign Trade and Cooperation of the Netherlands. In taking a look at Monday tradings on the floor of the exchange. With business news, Opanachi.
All right, thank you very much, Aleka Opanachi, for the business package, and good morning, Nigeria. Up next for us now is Newspaper Review. All right, well, we're going straight to Newspaper Review with Bayo Atebi, who is already in the studios here with us. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Claire.
Bayo.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Good morning from one side of my mouth.
Why?
You know why. You know why. Let me ask you, do you think we were robbed of yesterday's match or not? Or was it just a tactical error?
No. I think the pressure of qualifying was so heavy for our champions. And unfortunately, we earned 2 red cards. And if you look at the 2 red cards, they were legitimate and eventually, after review, awarded. In fact, I praise the Falcons for enduring and playing for the whole of the 90 minutes and the extra time, and were able to hold on to Morocco. Unfortunately, they lost in the penalty shootout. And at least they lost gallantly. We should be proud of the Super Falcons.
I don't know if I should agree with you, Bayo.
Well,
I don't know. I don't think the first one should get an outright.
You see, the moment the leg is raised above a certain level and it appears to threaten the opponent, the referee has the discretion that is a dangerous tackle and it has to be a red card. If you notice, there was a review and a delay before eventually the VAR drew the attention of the referee, and she had to go and review before he eventually reached the decision.
Okay, even the VAR is operated by humans. I mean, we see them there looking at it. Anyway, Bayo, regardless of the outcome of yesterday's match, the Super Falcons they are still Africa's champion.
Yes,
regardless.
9-time champion on the continent. The Super Falcons are number 1. And in the world, if you rate them against Morocco, they played against who is number 88 in the world. The Falcons is about 33. So the disparity is there. But congratulations to Morocco. It's their debut, and they were able to at least scale into the final of the WAFCON.
Oh, well, I guess so.
I don't know why
so,
people are silent about this.
I think some other people are of the opinion that our coach is a bit too not too tactical as expected.
Maybe because he didn't stand on the sideline and then was gesticulating and moving up and down. Matches are won by strategy, and I think if you look at the strategy he adopted in our second match after we lost to South Africa, you know that yes, he has the ability. And look at the resistance that 9 women super Falcons put against Morocco.
11.
All right. I think we'll take a look at the front.
Why aren't you saying anything?
Well, I mean, you make a comment on something that you have the facts on. I didn't watch the match, so I couldn't therefore be running an analysis on the match that I didn't watch.
Man U and Kingsley will watch.
Yes.
So what makes you think? What makes you think I'm a Man U fan?
Well, I don't know.
No, I mean, Man U has been in distress for some years now. It's unfortunate that the Super Falcons lost. They dominated the African continent for quite a while. But as I said last week, the key challenge that lies ahead of them is when they go to Australia and New Zealand for the World Cup tournament. They have to perform better than what they did in the past. And that way you attract more viewers and then more sympathizers and more supporters, I believe.
Supported.
I hope they will do well in Australia and New Zealand. You know why? Many of our players now are playing professional football abroad. Mm-hmm. Several years back, when we were the teams we were beating 10-0 in Africa are now a problem to us. We can hardly beat them 2-1 now. Why? Because 10 years back, we were ahead of many of them. Mm-hmm. And if you go to the World Cup, there are several nations, Sweden, United States, Japan, they've been ahead in women's football for a long time.
Anyway,
the gap is closing.
It's closing, thank you very much.
Yes, I will talk a bit about athletics because I don't know how...
That is your specialty, yes.
At the end of this, director is telling me. So let's look at the Punch. ASUU governorship poll, Adeleke's camp worries over litigation, rules PDP faction. There are quite a number of riders, 3 to be specific. All aggrieved members constitute danger. We are talking to Babayemi, that's PDP spokesman. I expect Oyetola to have congratulated me, concede defeat, says Governor-elect Adeleke. ASUU governor's lawyers inspect election results, may head for court. Tinubu awaits governor. And there's a picture story. It's a story of Lagos sawmill. The shanties, shops raised as fire got that sawmill. It's an area that has been existing for longer than I can remember, and it's still like this. I was sharing with Kingsley earlier on that I expected that areas like this should have gotten a facelift, remodernized. And I don't know, but it's still like this. It's unfortunate. ASUU meets August 1, so strike continues and enters 155th day. Page 8. Oyo gets new deputy governor. Olanio faults sacking. It's on page 12. Kanu restricts tricycle operators' activities over insecurity. Trending at the bottom of the paper, Kwankwaso unveils running mate, promises to rescue Nigeria. Now, soldiers killed terrorists in Benue, Katsina, and Niger. It's on page 5. Power supply to drop again. TCN alerts Nigerians. Power supply to drop again. TCN alerts Nigerians. Just take you up above the nameplate. Federal government, UN to identify terrorist criminals at airports. Benin Disco challenges BPE and plans UK legal action. NLC dares police, says protest notification unnecessary. Now, just talked inside. Consumers pay 193 billion naira to discos amid blackouts. That's according to a special report there. Now, traders, buyers groan as food inflation hits 20.60%. But just a major story, just topping the nameplate there. Aero suspends operations over skyrocketing Jet A1 price and others. Again, Aero suspends operations and because of skyrocketing Jet A1 price. Kingsley.
That's part of the inflation we're talking about.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a look at the window page of the Leadership newspaper, beginning with headlines above the name flag. Water Resources Bill won't usurp state's powers. That's according to the federal government. Police increase character certificate fee from 5,000 to 40,000 naira. Police increase character certificate fee from 5,000 naira to 40,000 naira. I hope it doesn't become another nomination fee at some point. What's the business of character certificate from 5,000 to 40? What is the justification for it? I don't know. Well, below the nameplate, the number of airlines in Nigeria shrinks as aero contractors closes shop. Well, that headline is misleading. Aero contractor has not closed shop. It's suspended scheduled flight services. Now, Osun, APC and PDP differ on Tinubu's chances in Southwest. And we'll take other headlines there. NDLEA opens case against Abba Kyari. Court admits 21 exhibits. Nollywood loses 2 actresses, Ada Ame and Shola Onoiga. Oyo Assembly impeaches Olaniyan as deputy governor. And then the lead story, of course, also has infographics. Says in 23 years, students lose cumulative 4 years to 16 ASUU strikes. Students lose cumulative 4 years to 16 ASUU strikes. Public varsities woes continue over government's failure to honor agreements. Labour mobilizes for nationwide protest next week. You can see the infographics there, say the number of ASUU strike, negative effects of it, and the duration. And ASUU's first strike was in 1988. No, that's not correct. Leadership is wrong there. We do hope that they will effect the correction. ASUU's first strike was in 1981. Bayo.
Thank you. Well, let's start with ASUU that you just concluded. The leadership is actually highlighting that in the last 23 years since the advent of democracy, a return to civil rule, ASUU has had an equivalent of 4 years of staying away from the classroom. It means 4 years, that is about more than 4 academic years that has been lost. But however, the paper is also saying that this has happened over a period of 23 years. The crux of the matter, the paper is blaming that there has not been agreement between the grievances between the academic staff union and government. However, the Labour has indicated that next week, in solidarity with the academic staff union, it is going to declare a protest nationwide. Meanwhile, the lecturers themselves are embarrassed because this thing is going on longer than necessary. They are now in a dilemma. Do we call off the strike and go on strike another time in future when these conditions have not been met, or persist with this current strike until the issues are resolved once and for all? That is the dilemma of ASUU now. But the pressure is on ASUU as well as it's on government. Meanwhile, our students and parents are wondering what will be the outcome of the next meeting they are holding, and especially that ASUU says they will be meeting by 1st of August. The expectation of the nation is that the strike will eventually be called off in the interest of students and the lecturers themselves. Don't forget that some lecturers too are fathers. They have their own children who are staying at home. So the ASUU strike is actually killing the educational system, especially in the public universities. Don't forget, private universities are still going on with the academic activities, and some state universities also are not affected.
Well, the risk in your proposal, Bayo, has also been suggested by some well-meaning Nigerians, is to, as it were, succumb to the blackmail of, oh, our children have been at home for several months running, and let them call off the strike, let there be a meeting point, and then the next time ASUU announces that the strike has been suspended. Go, just back up and look at the records. That's the way it's always been. Does it substantially address the
issues? Yes.
It doesn't. And before you know it, another 2 years, 3 years again, we are back on the same of the same complaints by ASUU. It doesn't address it. Funding is a matter that I have raised here on this program. I said, let us assume in federal universities you have 1 million students, and each of them were to pay a tuition fee of 100,000 naira per academic year. That will give the government, or they will give the schools, at least 100 billion naira. 100 billion. And we cannot continue to play the ostrich and say, oh, we're as rich as we were during the oil boom years. When, of course, you and I went to university and it was tuition free.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I had a great deal of luxuries,
yes,
as it were. But that situation has changed.
Yes.
We should address that. That is one. The other point, I see, again, as part of increasing the pressure points, NLC says it's going to go on a demonstration. It says the protest. That's demonstration, not that it's work stoppage. Yes. I've also read somewhere that the Association of Airline Practitioners or Aviation Practitioners are also threatening to weigh in on the ASUU strike and so on and so forth. So,
and the Association of Health Workers.
Yeah, we're fine. You are doing that for ASUU. Are you also going to do that for NASU? Are you also going to do it for NUAT? Are you going to do it for SANU? Because last week, the Minister of Labour was on Good Morning Nigeria, and he raised some issues, and I don't think that some of those issues have been fully addressed. As ASUU has come up with its own payment system, which it wants the government to take and utilize, the NUAT and SANU are also coming up with their own payment system. So how many payment systems are you going to have across the labor market, and all kinds of issues as well? I mean, they're also claiming that, for instance, from what was said, that the reason why the government turned down the Nimi Briggs report was that there were claims, according to the minister, by ASUU for some allowances for professors who will be going on sabbatical, not just for themselves but also for their families. So, if it is a matter of cost, who is going to bear that cost?
Well, Kingsley, I think that's what I call irreconcilable. I don't know.
Very irreconcilable. Yes, I agree with you. Positions. But those who are in dispute.
Yes.
I know. Please. So,
I just want to make an appeal before we end
before
this.
We wrap up,
yes, maybe the federal government now will not consider parents like us who can afford to send our children abroad to school, so that compare private universities, so that we can also put our children there, and then you deal with ASUU as you deem fit. Well, but I hear that the meeting is still going on. I think the Minister of Labour.
They are meeting this week.
Yes,
they are meeting today.
ASUU is supposed to hold a meeting 1st of August. Whenever they hold their National Executive Council meeting, they make pronouncement about the status of the strike. Well, our higher expectation is that for the sake of the children, for the sake of our nation, I think they will make sacrifice and ensure that
there should be a meeting point. There should be a meeting point. I agree with you, Kingsley. Honestly,
we say meeting point. ASUU will tell you where you will carry over the end allowances that you have not paid, and then it begins to balloon, and then 2 years down the road, maybe ASUU will then have a new executive who will then say, no, this is a matter that has been pending. We suspended the strike, now we're getting back to it. How do you address that? We can't run away from the fact that the time has come for the government itself to say, we cannot continue to fund education the way tertiary education, in particular university education, the way we are. But I know that we are signing up Bayo now. The story of aero contractors will be quite worrisome. Nigeria's oldest private airline, it's been around for over 60 years, and of course, it's talking about the challenges that it's facing. It is not just aero itself. You have to look at the direct and indirect jobs that will be affected. The suppliers that will also be affected on account of suspended service. But there's a story on page 13 of Leadership newspaper. Very quickly. The headline: Gifts to girlfriend non-refundable. Gombe court rules. It says. It
has never been refundable.
Well, this is a court. It's a court ruling. It's a court ruling. A court in Gombe State has declared that every gift voluntarily given to a girlfriend by a potential suitor is non-refundable.
Part of
the
reverse.
No. Senior judge of Gombe area court, located at Kofa Ide in the state capital, made a declaration while declaring a verdict on a suit filed by a heartbroken boyfriend against his girlfriend for betrayal.
So he's
Yusuf had sued Hafsat for jilting him after paying her bride price and demanded the court to instruct the lady to refund all that he spent on her. However, the presiding judge ruled that in Islam, the religion practiced by both plaintiff and defendant, Islam only recognizes bride price and stuffs considered as preconditions for marriage as refundable fees, but every other expense.
That is true.
Every other expense.
Oof.
Not refundable.
Bayo, thank you. We don't have time. We've given you enough time.
Thank you too.
We'll see you tomorrow. All right. Please don't go away. We'll come back in a short while to begin our conversation.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, while we're on the short break, we've been having some chit-chat around the subject matter that we're very clear about the decision in Gombe regarding the refund of expenses incurred by a jilted boyfriend. I just also mentioned that in law, if you promise to marry a woman and you break that promise, it could be a ground for an action in breach of contract. Okay, now to begin our conversation this morning.
The inflation is high, so I'm sure the men will tighten up and take any vow very seriously.
Well, that's right. But again, the challenge is if you don't spend, then the perception would be this one can't probably look after me. I mean, when inflationary figures continue to grow higher, it's a wet money here in the nation's capital territory. But regardless, we are discussing the nation's rising inflation and what to do about it. Let's listen to this background report put together by our correspondent Muhammad Natala.
One of the fundamental goals of modern economic system is to keep prices of goods and services stable and ensuring that prices do not rise continuously and astronomically. That is not the case in Nigeria, as recent data released by the National Bureau of Statistics for May 2022 revealed that Nigeria's inflation rate has risen to a new high of 17.71% in 11 months, despite reports of a rapid economic growth in the first quarter of 2022. And the NBS statistics is evident as Nigerians continue to grapple with the increasing food inflation and energy bills, foreign exchange rates, transportation fares, among others. Experts say the disruptions are also associated with the impact of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and other underlying economic constraints. More than 40% of Nigeria's population now live below the poverty line. To contain the inflationary pressures, the Central Bank of Nigeria recently increased its monetary policy rate by 150 basis points to 13%, as well as interest rates to slow inflation. The aim is to make people spend less and to lower demands until prices come down and stabilize naturally. However, what is the best way out of the rising inflation in the country? Unlike the law of gravity, what goes up in Nigeria continues to go up. How true is this assertion? How can food inflation be addressed as well? These are issues guests will provide answers to on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, let's get serious to talk about inflation, and it's biting hard, as we said earlier on. We have in the studio experts to discuss the topic. So let me quickly welcome Professor Uche Uwaleke, Professor of Capital Markets, Nasarawa State University, KEPI. He's also President of the Association of Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria, and a former governor of finance, commissioner of finance, Imo State. I'd like to welcome you. Maybe it's a professor, but you have to be a politician first.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning, viewers.
All right. Also joining.
You want to have money to pay for nomination and expression of interest.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Kingsley, I think our Zoom is not ready, so you may want to.
Yeah, well, that's Uche Waleke is a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. We also have two other regulars on the program. Ni Akinsiju, financial and investment analyst. Ni, delighted to have you this morning.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks for
And
having
from
me.
our Kaduna Network Center, I've been joined by another regular, Professor Yusha Ango, Dean School of Postgraduate Studies and Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship at Kaduna State University. Professor Ango, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, viewers. Thank you very much for having
Okay, now we understand the Zoom connection is just okay at this moment. So let's go over to the economist who is part of this conversation. Paul Alaje is an economist, as I said. If he's right there, now we understand that his visuals are not coming on just yet. So, gentlemen, Uche Waleke, Neya Kisiju, Yusha Ango, you are all regulars on Good Morning Nigeria whenever we are discussing economic and financial matters. We're seeing the numbers, 18.6% as at June. And just from anecdotal evidence alone, and from what we are seeing elsewhere around the world, and particularly the war in Ukraine and Russia, it looks like these numbers probably could be a bit higher. What is it that we are witnessing for us here in Nigeria, Prof?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kingsley. Well, as you rightly noted, is a global issue. Even in developed countries that traditionally usually have very low inflation figures, we are also beginning to see rising inflation rates. In the US, for example, inflation is at an all-time high. If you go by the latest figure released by the Bureau for Labor Statistics, inflation rates in the US is now well above 9%. When the Federal Reserve, target is just 2%. If you go over to the UK, 9.01%. And back home in Africa, South Africa for the first time too breached the Reserve Bank of South Africa's target. Inflation rates, the latest released in South Africa, talking about 6.5%. So you find that is the trend all around the world. Of all the countries I checked, it's only Russia that experienced disinflation. Disinflation is slow down in the rate of inflation between May and June. I think inflation came in at about 15% in Russia, from 17% between May and June. So all other countries we've had rising inflation, including Japan. And one thing they will always say is that the price pressure is coming from food. In all the cases, most of the cases, food, and of course a direct result of high cost of energy. They talk about high cost of fuel. As you know, only recently Ghanaians took to the streets in protest over high cost of living. In Ghana, inflation rate is as high as 27%, and of course we have countries where the thing is very, very high, like Turkey, where it is in excess of 70%. But one thing must be made clear, that in Nigeria we say inflation rate is 18.6%. That's the average. That's on the average. The National Bureau of Statistics usually handles 740 goods and services in the basket. There are also commodities that are commonly consumed that have experienced even 100% inflation rate. A good example is this bread, this small bread that most people use. Measured, I used to be 100 naira about a year ago, because when we say inflation year on year means higher movement, compared to the corresponding period the previous year. 100 naira about a year ago, today is 200 naira. So if something has moved from 100 to 200, it's actually 100% jump. Okay, so you have a lot of commodities like that, but you also have some that have remained stable. Newspaper, for example, that we used to buy at 250, is still 250. So when they take the average, we have the 18.6. So it's really a challenge that the world is experiencing this. And as you mentioned, it can be traced to the Russian-Ukraine war, supply disruptions, and so on. But beyond that, Kentele, in Nigeria, we've always had legacy issues. Even when these countries were experiencing this inflation in 2020 during the COVID, the US inflation rate was even close to, was below 2%, while the Federal Reserve had to drop interest rate to as low as 0%. Nigeria's inflation rate at that time was rising. And that was what the challenge we had at that time was actually stagflation. Stagflation, a situation where inflation rate is rising and economic growth is weak. So we've had legacy issues. And what are those legacy issues in our own case? You can point to high transport costs, okay, associated with weak transport infrastructure, okay. For me, that explains why you have inflation rates highest in places like Kwara and Kogi, and then you have very low inflation rates in, say, Sokoto, Jigawa, and Bauchi. So what that tells you is that insecurity doesn't fully explain the cause of inflation in Nigeria. If the MBS says you have low inflation in Jigawa, in Bauchi, in some of the northern states, and very high inflation rates in these other states with relatively low insecurity, that tells you that it doesn't fully explain it. So you have transport infrastructure, you have energy, rising fuel costs, rising diesel. We just read aviation. Some airlines are suspending operations. Of course, that will increase cost of flight. So when you have energy costs, you have transport costs, you have insecurity. These are factors that are driving inflation. So for me, inflation in Nigeria is more of cost push than demand pull. These are the two types we mentioned. It's more driven by cost than demand, and that's why the central bank really has little or nothing to do in terms of using monetary policy tools to tackle inflation.
Professor Chawaleke, I will say, okay, you have explained your own.
Yes.
Mr. Ni Akinshiju, please, how does this thing, we've heard Prof say it's global, okay, all other countries, it's a trend, okay, but what does it mean, this rising inflationary rate, especially as it affects food items? What does it translate for prices of goods in the market, the power to purchase of the people, and impact?
Well, I think the basic definition of inflation is consistent increase in prices. That's what it means. And of course, it translates to the fact that if you have 2,000 naira, and you could buy a product, let's say 2 items of a product for 2,000 naira in July, by August, the price of those two items had moved to 2,200 naira. It means that the 2,000 naira perhaps you have kept in the bank had reduced in real value from that 2,000 to 1,800. You will need an extra 400 naira to add to that an extra 200 naira to add to that your 2,000 to be able to purchase the same items you bought a month before. So what that translates is to means that you have either your money or your investment had been eroded.
Should we be more concerned that we are, already?
We should be. Inflation, especially increasing inflation, is not an ideal, it's not a positive economic environment. It is a negative economic environment. And when it is persistent over time, it could also lead to recession, because it also have multiple contagious effects. It affects virtually, like the 740 items we're talking about. An inflation impacting item have a way of also impacting another item. So if you have raw materials for a product, price increasing, the end product of that raw material would also have what you call the pass-through effect, of the raw material onto the finished product, and it goes to the market at a higher price. And of course, it comes a circle. It goes to the market at a higher price, The person who is in a service industry who purchases that product, purchases at a higher price, and now would need to also find a way of increasing his own rate of service to be able to purchase that item in another circle of purchase and demand and all that. So it's not a scenario that one wish for. So when inflation rate is also increasing, especially above the target, because every CBN, every reserve bank and all that have a target that would say this is our tolerance threshold for the economy. These are inflation tolerance threshold. For Nigeria, it has been over time between 8 and 9, maximum 9%, single digits. But unfortunately, I think more than how many years now we've not been able to achieve that. So it's a bad news. That's the long and short of it. Either for investor, if you invest and your what you call the negative real return, you invest to expect 14% on your investment, for instance, and inflation is 18.6%. It means you are losing more than 4% on that your investment. So you have negative real return on the investment, as it were.
Thanks. We'll return to you. Let's go back to Professor Yushua Ango. Professor Yushua Ango in our Cardinal Network studios. How concerning is the latest figure with regard to inflation and indeed other ancillary numbers?
Well, it is like my other colleague said, it's a worrisome situation. If there is any consolation at all, is the fact that it's a global issue. And we have said also on this program a few times that these kind of things are expected, because with what happened during the COVID era, whereby the global economy and for us here in Nigeria, we were closed for months without any production, without marketing, without being able to sell what we produce. We know that after the after effect of that, certainly there will be some consequences, and added maybe another injury, adding salt to some injury, is the fact that now there is also the Ukrainian-Russian situation. These are things that have happened, and that is why probably globally there is this impact. The impact is maybe different from different countries depending on their level of operation and sophistication. But nonetheless, we have seen it's a global trend. It's not a very welcoming, it's not a very nice situation, but we are in it. And we have seen from the statistics that have been released that the greater chunk of the inflation is food related, which is normal. That has been consistent in this country for some time. But I can assure you that it could have been even worse. I think, like has been stated, since they are looking at a basket of 740 different products, among them some food items. In some of them, clearly, the changes are obvious, very clear. Like, for example, bread. Locally here, I've seen, or we have had quite a number of times when the producers of bread will say they are going on strike simply to increase cost of their products. And that is because of the wheat component. Luckily, maybe some other greater staples, like rice and maize and soybeans and other products, some of them have not increased in the same quantum. I'm saying this, as a farmer. I always say that I'm a farmer myself. I have products that I sell, I produce. So I know that they have not increased significantly. Some of them have increased substantially. Like I said, wheat, like when you look at other products, some of them like yam and other things, they have increased in price. So it would have been worse if we have not had enough supply of these products. I think for us, that and the issue of energy costs are major components, obviously, that have contributed. So by and large, it's a very delicate situation. It's expected it's expected that this globally will have this challenge, but it's a very tasking situation we are in, and I believe it will take a while before this can be totally reversed.
Isha Ango, thank you for your opening remarks. And you said it could have been worse. I mean, I don't know if it should give us some relief or not, but let me introduce our next guest who is joining us via Zoom from Lagos. If he's on, Paul Alaje is an economist, and there he is. Mr. Alaje, thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria. And I'll just ask you, the guests all agree that what is happening in terms of rising inflation is a global trend, and fingers have been pointed at what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, in the main. But would you say that war, that situation is already impacting on our economy? Are we seeing the effect of Russia-Ukraine war already, or is the best, in quote, yet to come?
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me. Good morning. It's a global trend, truly. The world has experienced some crises due to COVID-19, but the current war between Russia and Ukraine has put the world again on the high jump, if I'm permitted to use that. Unfortunately, many African countries, including Nigeria, were not prepared for the kind of concern that we are going through. Nobody knows when the war will end, and as it continues, something that seems to be very persistent, or that seems to be the occurrence since 2018, when America and China started what we call tax war. We saw inflation going up, even having impact on Nigeria. Then COVID came. We saw the impact on Nigeria. Again, we have seen Russia, Ukraine. Will there be any other crisis where the first, what is going on between Russia and Ukraine has not ended? It therefore means that we cannot say this is the end, just the way we cannot say this is the beginning, because we are not sure. In a period of uncertainty, what do we need to do? We need to reduce risk. One of the risks that we are faced with today is the risk of food shortage. And you have seen what is happening to food supply, thanks to Central Bank of Nigeria, who have massively intervened in the availability of grain. That is why we are not buying a bag of rice for 70,000 naira. If Central Bank had not promoted that program, then by now, I'm sure that price of rice should be between 60 to 70,000. But that said, it has also increased. Average price is about 30,000 naira now, even without the intervention. What does this now mean? People are having the impact because inflation has implication on politics. Check several American presidents that refused to control inflation. They were not given another chance to power. Again, check policy. Many countries are saying they don't want to export some of their output to other countries, which includes wheat, which has implication on the availability of bread in Africa, because that is where we import from, even though we have a lot of arable land in North Central, in Northeast and Northwest, and a few other parts of Nigeria. But we have not been able to invest in agro as regards that subsector. So the implication is huge. The most important implication is that inflation throws people to poverty because it steals their purchasing power. The purchasing power of people, monies they have to buy, or even though they earn the same amount in figure, it has marginally increased. Unfortunately, more people will become poor. What must we do? Is to find an alternative. I'm happy you have a lot of professionals in your studio today, and I believe all of us are professionals. We agree that we need to look at the numbers one after the other. What are the factors inducing inflation? Russia, Ukraine, they are not even in Africa. They are in eastern part of Europe. Why is it having tremendous impact on an African nation, and the biggest one for that matter? It is because that nation has not been able to understand or optimize what we call competitive cost advantage in economies and to look at value chain of things. That is why it's having implication on us. There are things that we have no business buying from outside Nigeria, but we continue to import them because it is relatively convenient because of some things that we have not done at home. First among all will be power supply. You can't have significant industry. You saw what Manufacturer Association of Nigeria mentioned to government.
Paul, it looks like your audio is off. Maybe if the engineers advise us as to the restoration of your audio links, we'll come back to you. I know that you were in full flight when the audio just went up. But let's come back to the studios. I want us, gentlemen, to just take a look at this matter. It probably is tangential, but in a sense, in my opinion, it just might help us have a better evaluation of what's playing out. Now, this is the 5th month of the Russia-Ukraine war. 5th month, and there is no end in sight. If anything, there are continuing reports of further attacks and entrenchment by the Russians. Is it that leading Western economic and financial experts always undervalued, underestimated, or even underreported the impact of Russian economy, the impact of the Ukrainian economy? And all of a sudden, I'm not talking now about, say, gas supplies to Europe, and Europe, they're already bleeding from that. But if you look at the global impact of that war itself, it's like everyone is feeling the impact. Did we always, if I say we, did they, I mean, not, did they always undervalue and underestimate the role of Russia and Ukraine in global economy? We're talking about grains in the first instance. Sunflower oil. A number of countries have taken the measures, including Indonesia and Malaysia, to freeze exports of their palm oil or the refined products of those commodities. Did we undervalue these economies, Russian and Ukrainian economies? And if so, are we in for a longer haul of these scarcities and inflationary pressures? Prof, beginning with you.
Yes, I think to a large extent, I would say the global powers underestimated the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war. We have to recognize the place of Russia even in the world economy. Russia is a major exporter of wheat. If you look at Ukraine is said to be the food basket of Europe. And Russia is a major oil producer and also a major oil exporter. Okay, even in the OPEC plus arrangement, Russia is a major player. So the Russian-Ukraine conflict is impacting the world, the global economy, more through the, if you like, increase in oil price. So for countries that are not producing oil, for consumer nations, they are feeling the impact. That is why today you find countries like South Africa, for example, having a high inflation rate. It is because of the high oil price. Even for us in Nigeria, ordinarily we should be reaping the benefits from high oil price. But why are we feeling it? Because again we are importing petroleum products, and the amount the government is spending on subsidy is also contributing, because if government has to spend 4 trillion or spend an amount that is in excess of what has been budgeted, if assuming it is budgeted, of course that also means that government is borrowing. Government will borrow to be able to meet up with the subsidy obligations, and the more government borrows, the more interest rates are driven up in the economy. So I think the Russian-Ukraine war, yes, it's impacting the global economy, but for us in Nigeria, that is not the major reason why we are having this, high inflation. As I said, it's something that has been with us. It was only in 2021 that we had some disinflation, and now it has also continued to rise. And as I said earlier on, ours is a peculiar situation, peculiar in the sense that it is more driven by cost push factors. And that explains, or partly explains, why even when the central bank tries to increase the monetary policy rate, it doesn't really address the inflationary challenge. It doesn't rein in inflation. As we speak, of course, maybe later today, the CBN will come up with their position, the MPC, on the monetary policy tools, on the parameters. And of course, I expect that these parameters will be held, because right now, the monetary policy rate in Nigeria is quite high at 13%. So further increasing the monetary policy rate will not address the inflationary pressure. And that's because inflation is not the demand type. It's not caused by too much money, or maybe, as they say in economics, high money supply. That is not the case here. The case here is because we have a lot of things that are experiencing high costs in production. As I mentioned earlier, transport is one of them. Energy, is another. The issue of insecurity is also one, because, as you know, farmers can't go to farms. But as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't fully explain the situation. Because if you look at the numbers by the National Bureau of Statistics, urban inflation at over 19% is higher than rural inflation. And as I also mentioned, you have inflation rates very high, food inflation very high in places like Kwara, for example, as high as 26%. And in some other places, you have it as low as maybe 17%. So you find that the range of food inflation, for example, 10%, that's 1,000 basis points, tells you that transportation cost may be a major factor. And transport cost is usually high when we have high fuel cost or high energy cost. So I think, just as we mentioned, we need to do something about power. Electricity is very important. We can't be relying on the national grid. I think today I just read that the TCN is warning that power supply will also drop. So why would the country, everybody panic because the national grid is having issue? Why can't we focus on mini grids to address this problem?
Let me pause.
Power is critical.
Yes, let me pause you a bit, because I know we'll get to the issues of how we can address this, and then we'll take them one by one. But on the issue of the gap between urban and rural inflationary rates,
yes,
I think it can be explained. A lot of people from the rural areas are moving to the urban centers, and then you don't have a lot of people taking. I mean, that's the layman understanding. That's why you have more. The inflation is higher in the rural areas than in the urban area.
Yes, and I'm also saying if you had an efficient transport system, these goods can be moved at very low cost from the rural to the urban.
I agree with you.
If you had an efficient transport system, if you had rail lines, for example, the wide gap between inflation rate in a place like Kogi, food inflation in Kogi is as high as 25 to 26%, and somewhere in Kaduna, where it is 17%, according to National Bureau of Statistics, or Jigawa, where it is much lower. If you had a rail system, you could move goods from the cheaper, where it is cheap, to where it is relatively expensive, and that's where you end up bridging the wide gap between
the urban and the rural.
Not just urban and rural, in the states where the thing is high and states where it is low.
Okay, sorry. I want to ask Professor Yushao Angu, because he's a farmer, and that's why I'm actually directing this question to you. Now, according to the NBS, the composite food index rose to 20.60% in June. Now, it says this is as a result of changes in food prices due to higher food prices volatility. And one of the major causes of this volatility is the increase in the price of bread, one of the food items. I remember buying bread, just last week or 2 weeks ago. The bread I used to buy for 400 naira, I now buy for 600 naira, a loaf. The one for 1,000 naira, you now buy for almost 1,600 naira a loaf. And I'm saying, despite the interventions of the CBN in this area, is it that the beneficiaries are not tapping into the CBN's policies, to shore up production of wheat locally?
The various interventions, if you remember very well, CBN intervention started with rice, and then it has gone through some other products. Some of them, wheat is one of them of recent. And what we need to take note of is, the land on which you produce certain products. Farmers can move from one product to another easily. So what happens is that, for example, if there is encouragement or they realize based on their own perception that a particular product may do well, the same land, they can now plant another thing. This is happening already as we are speaking now. For example, because of the cost of fertilizer this year, in my area, many farmers that ordinarily produce maize have shifted to other products that do not require too much fertilizer. So the same thing, the land that is used for wheat production, normally wheat production here in Nigeria is dry season production. So normally those lands are available, but there are alternatives. There are other products that can be produced depending on an encouragement. Yes, of recent, we have seen intervention by the central bank in the area of wheat too. So so long as policies are not consistent and so long as inputs are not made available on time, this is consistent, this is what happens year in, year out. I don't understand why it is like this, but that is what happens every now and then. Some people with support of some agencies, for example, approached me that they were interested in, we produce some soybeans, they want to use us, so that we can produce some soybeans for them. But by the time they turn around to bring the inputs, we have already planted, we have already gone far. So there is no way we could participate or take part in the scheme. So the same thing happens with the CBN intervention. It's a wonderful intervention. They have tried very well, and that is why we don't have, like I said, that is why even the food inflation that we're talking about will have been much, much worse if not for CBN intervention. But the wheat is an area they have gone into of recent, and it's also suffering from the same thing that every other field is suffering. Inputs don't come on time, things don't happen on time, and farmers have to decide based on information and based on resources available to them where to invest, what to do, or what to plant on a particular piece of land. So lands are available, but farmers shift from one to another depending on resources available.
Okay, Professor Ishao, thank you very much. I want to return to Neya Kinsiju, and if you may, I still want to return to the question I posed earlier. The preface being whether, look, the world through the lenses of Western financial and economic analysts underestimated and undervalued the Russian and Ukrainian economies. From what we are seeing, the blockade on some of the ports in Ukraine have been blamed. The blockade has been blamed, for instance, for some of the supply chain disruptions that we are having. But early on, it was a bit of curiosity when it was said that, because of the war in the Ukraine, we were having also some energy supply disruptions for us here in Nigeria. And the point was made that, look, some of those tank farms that Nigeria normally will go to import refined petroleum products, those are actually traders. Yeah. That you have Russia not just producing but also refining. And that's why I'm saying this, that if this is going to be a long drawn out war, and the war along with it, the raft of sanctions already imposed on Russia by Western economies, what does this mean for us? Because the more you look at it, because if it means that energy prices are up and the cost of importing it's also higher. In the meantime, our domestic crude oil production is not up more than 1.2 something, more than 1.3 million barrels a day.
Actually, the truth is that we have become a victim of our inefficient past. There's a story, like Prof said, it's a story of a legacy of inefficiency, and that is what we are suffering from. The European American intervention in the Russian-Ukraine war, for me, it's principally an ego thing. Russia, I mean, if we just go briefly, traverse that aspect of international politics, Russia was actually seeking out for a bipolar world that we used to have, and then of course there's the resistance of the Americans, to sustain the unipolar world system, and virtually reasons were lost, and nobody could actually anticipate the kind of economic impact this would have, not understanding the situation and the power, the influence of Russia across the globe. Don't forget that OPEC and Russia had become OPEC plus, principally to control pricing. But the fact of slamming sanction, taking away more than 7 million barrels a day out of the world supply, would not only impact America and Europe, it will also actually impact Africa, the emerging economy, developing economies. So for Nigeria, where we are supposed to make a gain, out of this, because of a legacy structural limitation that we've had, our rigs, our oil rigs are not functional. We used to have about 19 oil rigs functional as at 2016, 2017. We have less than 6. It's actually been increased to about 6 now. And that was your oil rigs that you used to count your productive capacity. We have not been investing in exploration and production over the past 15 years, So we have issues in matters of production, and then to complicate matters, whatever is happening to security in the farmlands is also happening to security on the high sea. And that is why we are saying that so much oil is being stolen. You cannot steal oil and carry it in a truck tank, across the road. You have to take it across the waters, Then you want to imagine what is happening to our navy and all that. So this is a time we are supposed to net off whatever might have been the impact of the international conflict. For us, this should have been a time we should be celebrating. But by default, we are in this situation, and we are in this situation again because, like I said, historical inefficiency, historical deficiency too. What is happening to our refineries? If we had had our refineries functioning, we would not have had issues with diesel prices. Diesel has been taken out of the basket of subsidy.
I think with what is happening now, I think maybe we will probably cut hands down, because with COVID we were able to ward off, anticipate COVID and then prepare.
I disagree. We didn't anticipate COVID. We had a structure in place that could take care of COVID. Economic stimulus plan, we're doing the ARGP and all that. Then we could transit.
COVID itself. What I meant, we anticipated impacts that it will have, and then we were prepared. We had the structure, so we were able to contain. I mean, we were able to bounce back. It affected, but we were able to bounce back. But with this, so far, it has shown that probably we're caught Ukraine and Russia war. But I'm sorry, we'll get back to you when we come back from this break. And I hope Paul Alaje is also back now because, all right, we don't have him. But let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. All right, welcome back. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we're looking at the rising inflation rates in the country, and our guests are still here. I know, Kirsty, you've got your question.
Well, just to go back to Professor Yusha Ango, we understand that Paul Alaje, the economist with us via Zoom, is not back on yet with Zoom. So in our Kaduna Network Center, Professor Yusha Ango, when you look at the ramifications of the current inflationary push and the comment made by Professor Uche Uwaleke that there is a limit to which the CBN, through its MPC, can deploy monetary policy measures to rein in the current inflation. Are we going to be stuck with this spiraling inflation, or what more options do we have in the basket to tame it?
Number of options. Some of them, of course, monetary options, which the central bank is responsible for, and it's globally now. Central banks globally are increasing their interest rates. Trying to discourage or to because there is a, like Prof said earlier, when you save money and the interest rate you are getting is much low, you don't feel encouraged, to save more money compared to inflation. When inflation is much higher in Nigeria than that. Now, that is one. There are other monetary measures that they need to take, and they are taking. For example, to reduce the money in circulation. Naturally, with so much money in circulation, there will be pressure on inflation, on prices. So naturally, this will happen. So I believe that, yes, monetary aspect is one aspect. Another aspect, certainly, are fiscal options. Perhaps, not leaving the monetary aspect, maybe perhaps the central bank, or I don't know, the MBS, whether they have taken cognizance of the primaries, because maybe the primaries which happened in June, around May, June, must have impacted also the inflationary pressure, because so much money was brought out, obviously, and was spent. Now, another area in which the action needs to be taken is in terms of the fiscal measures. There is need wherever expenditure will be made. If they are made on Nigerian products for capital projects, the more, the better. Even for recurrent expenses, more of it should be spent in the country, because part of the problem, certainly there is an exchange rate issue. We know what is happening, what has happened to the exchange rate, and that is part of also the pressure, and that is part of what is increasing the cost of operations of various aspects in the economy. So one of the things that can be done on the fiscal side, on the government side, is to ensure that more expenditure is done within the country rather than imported, at least from the government perspective. And everything should be done to discourage that, to discourage imports or reliance on imported products, especially where such products are available in the country. So this can also assist in reducing that impact. And of course, like Nii said and others, if we can quickly ensure that we reduce or at least we reactivate. We are aware that contracts have been given for revitalization of some of our refineries. So the faster we can get this to work, I think the better for us. But there is another side to it. The problem in terms of the prices at which we sell our petroleum products, it has now led to a situation whereby we are completely subsidizing our neighbors, more or less. We are not just subsidizing Nigerians. That is aside from the corruption that also takes place in that sector. So, but if we revive the refineries, perhaps we can reduce the impact, and then take measures to ensure that we limit the number or the volume of our products that are finding their ways in these various markets. Because these various markets are selling their products right now per liter, in hundreds of naira per liter, as against what we are selling in this country. Now, finally, we need to now think very consciously about perhaps reducing the volume of subsidy that we're giving, even though of course that will have a reaction. It will affect prices, I know, but it's not realistic what we are having right now, and especially given the fact that we're also subsidizing more or less the economies around us. So I think that is something also to look out for.
Right, Professor Ango, thank you. We're back here. I know Professor Waleke would like to respond, but also add with it, because we are winding down now. We're looking at solutions. I know that I don't know if we're still implementing the backward integration policy, but I know that the CBN has provided, very, expansive platform for manufacturers and industrialists to leverage on, of course, providing them with, access to loans, enabling them to develop infrastructure, and of course, helping them to be able to be in a position to source local materials right here. Is it still working, or is there something wrong with it, and that is the reason why we are not, really meeting up our demands?
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to share the view that but for the CBN's intervention, the situation would have been worse. As you know, the CBN has been intervening in virtually all the sectors of the economy. As we speak, the CBN has a lot, on its plate. And these interventions, no doubt, has helped to, moderate, prices. Now, having said that, I want to submit that it is time we empowered, as part of the solutions, we empowered our development finance institutions, so that it's not seen as if the CBN is not seen as if it is the one, doing it all. The CBN has major responsibility for price stability. The CBN has a responsibility to supervise all the banks. The interventions are in order, but they need to be scaled up, okay, for them to have meaningful impact. And to be able to do that, our development finance institution should be strengthened. The challenge we are having with inflation is food. Is majorly, on food. 20.6% is, is on the high side. And for me, if the Bank of Agriculture, for example, is strengthened, it can take off some of these responsibilities.
In what way?
Recapitalization, and not only recapitalization, restructuring. We need to restructure the Bank of Industry to reposition it to be able to intervene in the agric space. Okay, there are models out there that are performing. We can borrow from. A good example is the Agricultural Bank of China. Agricultural Bank of China is not wholly owned by the government of China. The government of China only has 40% stake in the bank, and that bank is listed on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. It's also listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So when you privatize the Bank of Agriculture, with the government having maybe a significant interest, say 40%, and then the bank is taken to the exchange with time, so that other people can, private sector can come in. It's only when the private sector comes in that you can have that place better managed. You can have that place, have low non-performing loans, because loans will not be politically tied. They won't be given to politically connected persons. Okay, and then you also have improvement in their asset quality. So I submit strongly that there's something has to be done about the Bank of Agriculture. The way it is not fulfilling its role, in the
how will that ensure that manufacturers and industrialists, have access to the raw materials, locally, not importing?
Yes,
because it is the imports now that is, putting us at risk.
Yeah, first and foremost, we are talking about access to credit. One of the major challenges that farmers have, even the industrialists have, is access to credit. And that's what I'm talking about, empowering development finance institutions. If you talk to Nexim will tell you, or rather if you even research, you will find that one of the challenges Nexim is having is a low capital base. Bank of Industry too needs to be strengthened. So these our development finance institutions should be strengthened to complement the efforts of the central bank. That is the point I'm making here. Another thing I've also observed is that this issue of inflation will remain with us so long as we don't do something about the structure of the economy. Yes, we've talked about over-reliance on oil. That is one aspect of it. The other aspect is the way our economy is being composed at present. if you look at the latest report by National Bureau of Statistics, the sectors of the economy are broadly divided into three. You have agriculture, you have industry, okay, and then you have services. Agriculture contributes about 23%. Industry, about 21%. Services, 56%. So you now realize that the productive base of the economy is relatively low for a developing economy. And as long as we don't produce, because our inflation problem is output oriented, it is a supply issue, as I've always maintained, and not a demand issue. It's only when it's a demand issue that the central bank can, through monetary policy tools, address the issue. But because it's a supply issue, a lot now is on the table of the government, and that's why, for me, what applies in our case is the fiscal theory of price policy. And what does that theory say? That theory says that the government has a lot of role to play in curbing inflation, where inflation is a cost is of the cost push type. So that's why I said the issue of transport infrastructure in the medium to long term has to be fixed. The issue of energy, the issue of electricity. If you don't fix all this, and if you don't also correct the structure now that has more on services. Remember, services require skilled labor, more or less. But you have agriculture and industry that should actually drive the economy at this stage of our development. In developed countries, you have this structure which is working for them. But when a country is developing, you should pay more attention to production, agriculture, and industry. In the last National Bureau of Statistics report, agriculture is in a positive territory, 3%. But if you look at it on quarter, agriculture fell by minus 28%. If you also look at transport sector is in a negative territory by as much as minus 17%. So as long as these critical sectors are in the negative territory, okay, you will continue to have this inflation.
I just wonder, Professor Uche Waleke, thank you. I think that could be a subject matter for another conversation regarding how to restructure the fundamentals of the economy and shift the base from services to industry as well as agriculture, and what to do with the development finance enablers in the environment. But just to bring in Niyi Akinseju again to get his own suggestions as to the way forward. Let's, if we can, touch on this briefly. Because Joshua Ango also talked about it, that subsidy is not sustainable and so on and so forth. For many years, one always had the argument about the supply and availability of diesel. That diesel was available because the diesel market had been deregulated. So what has happened now? Is it that theory has been exploded? That suddenly diesel is now over 800 naira per liter from max of 200. How much of this can you blame on the Ukraine-Russian war? How much can you blame on the rise in crude oil prices? I'm asking this because if you recall, about 15 years ago, particularly around 2007, 2008, when crude oil prices were well over $100 per barrel. Yeah. And I think at some point, some people made some political capital out of that by saying crude oil prices were 140 and so on and so forth per barrel. Yeah. What was the price of crude oil? What was the price of crude oil at that time relative to the price of diesel? Did diesel get up to 200 naira a liter at that time? So why is it that now you're having crude oil price at about $100 per barrel? We're looking for crude oil at 800. We're looking for rather diesel at 800 naira per liter. And diesel is part of our energy crisis situation because everybody looks for it as an excuse. I don't know whether it's a complex matter I've tried to raise.
It's not exactly complex. Yes. It's we are experiencing that principally because of depreciation in our currency. If you compare the rates, the naira dollar rate at the time we're talking, it's more than 700% depreciation now. And of course, the access to the same dollar, is restricted now because we are seeing limited inflow of dollar again as a result of the fact that we are not selling crude oil enough. But I quickly want to perhaps clarify. In the matter of our food production, it is not as if we are suffering or experiencing a shortage of food production. The increase in prices are actually the cause of, related directly to price of diesel. Because trucking food items from the farm gate to the city gate or the city market had to be taken through trucks, diesel-powered trucks. Okay. And of course, you now have 800 per liter increase from about 2-3 months ago, 270 something to 800. The truck drivers, truck owners would increase the rate, and that would be passed on to consumers. So that's principally is what's driving that. And I want to also relate the development finance institution issues raised by Prof. I think what might be the solution is ongoing now, and that's why I always respect the loan to deposit ratio policy of the CBN. I tracked it from 2018. The loan credit of banks to the private sector was as little as 15 point something trillion as at 2018. Between 2018, because of that rate, because of that policy, it had grown to more than 37 trillion credits to the private sector. Okay. So perhaps if we are seeing a running economy as it were, not exactly the way we want it.
What kind of credit?
Principal, and again, the character of that credit actually move. We've seen a paradigm shift from credit to oil and gas, to manufacturing, to agriculture, even to household. It has even become so liberal. Access to credit has become so liberal because some banks will tell you, you can come and borrow, you just do your pre-qualification and come and borrow money for household items. That's for us, for household consumption, and of course that also impacts on the GDP and all that going forward.
Okay, Mr. Nee, sorry, I have to pause you to get Angu. Just say his last words before we round up. Professor, just in less than 30 seconds, please. What should the government economic team be doing at this moment?
Like I said earlier, I will repeat it. What they need to do to put emphasis as much as possible on locally produced products. We should be driving our productions. We should ensure, that our refineries are working, and then we should also ensure that our whatever we produce, if we are going to subsidize, or which is what we are doing, then we are blocking and ensuring that this thing is not getting to other places, because we don't have the capacity, we don't have the means, we don't have the economy to sustain ourselves and then sustain everybody around us. It's not possible. So I think that is what we should do, and I hope we take it seriously and address it. That will reduce it. And then I hope also any assistance or any plans that are going to be made, especially as it affects food and production of farm products, let it start early. They can plan for example, for the 2024 season now, so that they will give farmers inputs on time. What they do always is to give inputs when it's not required. So I hope that they will plan well ahead of time and release these products on time and inputs on time. I hope that will reduce in the long term these pressures on inflation. Thank you.
Professor Yusau Ango, Dean, School of Postgraduate Studies and Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship, Kaduna State University. You joined us from our Kaduna studios. Thank you very much for your contribution. And I also like to, although he's not on screen, to appreciate Paul Alaje, who's an economist. He joined us briefly, but made very valuable contribution before his connection went off. Let me also appreciate our in-house Public Affairs Analyst, Niyi Akinshijo, is Financial and Investment Analyst as well. Thank you, Niyi, for always obliging us your time. Professor Uche Waleke is Professor of Capital Market at the Nasarawa State University, KEFI. He is also President, Association of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria, and former Commissioner for Finance in Imo State. Always a pleasure to also have you to analyze these very naughty economic terms for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at foreign now. Sri Lanka's parliament to accept names for president. Also, Iran, Russia, Turkey presidents to hold talks on Syria war in Tehran. Here is details with Garba Mohammed Natala.
The Sri Lankan parliament expressed readiness to accept presidential candidates to elect a new president